All right, so today we're diving deep into AI artificial intelligence.
A topic that's...
Yeah, it's everywhere, you know?
It really is.
And we have this fascinating conversation to help us explore it.
Yeah.
Where S. Vishnumurthy is talking about AI with his daughters,
Right.
Niharika, who's in 7th grade, and Varnusha, who's in 3rd grade.
Wow.
I know, so cool.
It's amazing.
To hear, such a complex topic explained in a way that even young kids can grasp.
Yeah.
So we're going to try to do that today, too.
Absolutely.
We're going to break down AI into its core components, see how it came to be and what it might mean for our future.
I'm excited for this one.
Me too.
Okay.
Okay, so to really understand AI, I think we need to start by looking back.
Right.
At what computers were like before.
Yeah, before all this fancy AI stuff.
Exactly. Like before they were, writing poetry and composing music.
Right.
So the conversation actually uses a really good analogy.
Okay.
It compares early computers to calculators.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, simple, right?
Yeah.
So you input data like numbers for a math problem,
Right.
and the computer processes it using these things called logic gates.
Logic gates.
Yeah, they're basically like tiny electronic decision makers.
Okay.
And then you get the output, the result.
So kind of like a very basic form of computation.
Exactly. And Vishnumurthy really emphasizes that these early machines, they were all about logic.
Mm-hmm.
They could do math like nobody's business.
Yeah.
Addition, subtraction, multiplication, division.
You name it.
You got it.
Wow.
And as technology improved, the chips got more and more transistors and resistors on them.
Right. Packing in more power.
Exactly. And that meant they could do these calculations super fast.
I mean, it's incredible how far we've come.
I know, from like counting on our fingers to these supercomputers.
It's mind-boggling.
But here's the thing, even with all that speed and processing power,
Yeah.
these pre-AI computers, they were really limited.
Okay.
They could only do exactly what they were programmed to do.
So no thinking for themselves?
Not at all. They were basically tools.
Right. Very powerful tools, but still tools.
Yeah, and that's why people weren't really afraid of them.
Yeah, they weren't seen as a threat.
No, just helpful machines.
Makes sense.
But then things started to change.
Okay.
And the idea of making machines that could kind of think like humans, well, that's when AI was born.
That's a big leap.
It is. In the conversation, they introduce AI as artificial intelligence.
Okay.
And they describe it as trying to mimic the human mind.
Mimic as in like copy.
Yeah, kind of like an actor playing a role.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. They're trying to embody that character, but it's not really them.
So AI is like acting like a human mind.
Exactly. And to understand how that works, we need to think about the human brain.
Okay, the physical organ.
Yeah, with its billions of neurons.
Right, the building blocks of the brain.
Exactly. And these neurons, they connect and interact with each other to form these complex networks.
And that's where intelligence comes from.
Yeah, all our thoughts, feelings, memories, everything.
It's amazing to think that it all happens because of these tiny connections.
It really is. And the conversation uses another great example to explain this.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Imagine you meet someone new, let's say Jeevan Uncle.
Jeevan Uncle, all right. So the first time you meet him, you don't really know much about him.
Right, just a name and a face, maybe.
But over time, as you interact with him more, you learn things about him, his likes, dislikes, his personality quirks.
You form a picture of him in your mind.
Exactly. And what's happening in your brain is that you're forming new neural connections.
Like building a mental file on Jeevan Uncle.
Yeah. And the more you interact with him, the stronger those connections become.
So you're constantly learning and updating your understanding of him.
Right. And this idea of connections, it actually relates to a really interesting point they brought up about loops.
Loops?
Yeah. So Varnusha, the younger daughter, she gets annoyed when her sister keeps repeating the same thing over and over.
Oh, I can relate to that.
Right. It's like getting stuck in a thought pattern.
Yeah, it can drive you crazy. And Vishnumurthy connects that to computers, too.
Really?
Yeah, he talks about how an infinite loop in a computer program can cause it to crash.
Because it's stuck doing the same thing over and over.
Exactly. And the processor overheats.
The whole system can fail.
Yeah. So both in our brains and in computers, these repetitive, unproductive loops can be a problem.
That's fascinating. Had you thought about it that way?
So how do we avoid those loops, both in our own thinking and in AI?
Good question.
Well, the conversation emphasizes the importance of training.
Training.
Yeah. For our brains, it's about constantly learning new things.
Okay, keeping those neurons firing.
Exactly. Vishnumurthy talks about how our physical bodies have limitations.
Right.
But our minds...
They have so much potential.
Yeah, almost limitless.
Yeah.
And he uses Albert Einstein as an example.
Someone who really used his brain power.
Definitely. And I think it's important to clarify something here.
Okay.
When we talk about neurons, we're not talking about like separate little things you can see in a brain. It's more like they're these memory cells that hold electrical pulses.
Okay.
And they're all interconnected, forming these complex networks.
So it's a vast network of electrical activity.
Exactly. And this brings us back to AI.
Okay, how does this all connect?
Well, just like we train our brains by learning new things, we can train artificial neural networks in AI by feeding them data.
Data like information.
Exactly. And as the AI processes this data, it adjusts the connections between its artificial neurons.
So it's learning from the data.
Yeah, kind of like how we build those neural connections when we get to know Jeev and Uncle.
Interesting. So the AI is building its own kind of mental model.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this ability to learn from data is what makes AI so powerful.
It's like teaching a computer how to think.
In a way. And that's why some people call this the AI revolution.
A revolution.
Yeah, they compare it to the invention of the wheel.
Wow, that's a big comparison.
I know, but think about it. The wheel changed everything.
Transportation, agriculture, trade.
Exactly. And AI has the potential to be just as transformative.
So we're witnessing a major historical shift.
Potentially. And they make an interesting point about how it's not always the inventors who benefit the most from new technologies.
That's true.
They use the example of refrigerators.
Okay.
So the inventors of the refrigerator probably didn't get as rich as the companies selling ice cream and cold drinks.
Because everyone needed a fridge to store those things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the same with airplanes.
Right. The Wright brothers didn't exactly start massive airline companies.
So what's the takeaway for us?
What should we be doing?
Well, it's about embracing AI, learning how to use it to our advantage.
Just like people learned to use calculators.
Yeah. They became indispensable tools.
Right.
And AI could be the same way. It could change the way we work, live, and interact with the world.
It's exciting and a little bit scary at the same time.
Definitely. So let's talk more about how AI is already impacting us.
Good.
One area they discuss is the rise of automation.
Right. Robots and machines taking over jobs.
Well, not just robots, but think about calculators. They basically eliminated the need for shopkeepers to be amazing at mental math.
That's true. I never thought about it that way.
And then barcode scanners came along.
Making checkout faster.
Yeah, and meaning you didn't need to be highly educated to work at a grocery store.
So technology is changing the skills that are needed for certain jobs.
Exactly. And it's only going to continue. They even mention these stores where you just walk out with your items and they're automatically scanned and charged to your account.
Wow. That's
I know, it's like the future is already here.
It is. So with all this AI out there, are there different types?
Yeah, they actually break it down into 3 main categories.
Okay, let's hear it.
So first you have standalone AI tools.
Standalone.
Yeah, things like ChatGPT, Gemini, DeepSeek, Grok.
Oh, I've heard of some of those.
Right. They're basically applications that are trained on huge amounts of data from the internet.
So they've learned from all that online information.
Exactly. Then you have integrated AI tools.
Integrated.
Yeah. So this is where AI is built into platforms we already use, like YouTube and Google.
I can see that.
So those recommendations you get for videos or the way your search results are personalized.
That's AI working in the background.
Exactly. And then the third category is customized AI tools.
Customized.
Yeah. So this is AI that's trained on specific private data.
Okay.
Like a bank might use AI to analyze its financial documents.
So it's tailored to their specific needs.
Right. And because it's trained on their own data, it's more secure.
That makes sense.
So these categories kind of help us understand all the different ways AI is being used.
Yeah, it's not just one thing. It's a whole spectrum.
And to go even deeper, we need to talk about some of the terms we hear all the time.
Okay, like what?
Well, they start with LLMs, large language models.
LLMs.
Yeah, that's what those standalone AI tools we talked about often are.
So ChatGPT, DeepSeek, Grok, those are all LLMs.
Right. They're trained on massive data sets of text and code.
And they can do some pretty amazing things.
Yeah, like generate text, translate languages, answer questions in a human-like way.
It's pretty incredible.
It is. And those LLMs, they fall under the broader category of generative AI.
Generative AI.
Which is basically any AI that can create new content.
Okay, so it's not just about processing information, it's about creating something new.
Exactly. And another important term is deep learning.
Deep learning.
Yeah, this is a more complex type of machine learning.
Okay.
It uses neural networks with multiple layers, hence the deep.
So even more interconnected neurons.
Exactly. And those multiple layers allow the AI to learn really intricate patterns from data.
So it's like going deeper into the complexities of the information.
And of course, at the heart of deep learning are those neural networks.
The artificial brains.
Right. And the process of training those networks, that's what we call machine learning.
So machine learning is the engine behind AI.
Exactly. And all of these concepts, neural networks, deep learning, LLMs,
They're all part of AI.
artificial intelligence, it's like a hierarchy.
Okay.
Each level builds upon the previous one.
So it's like a pyramid with AI at the top.
And to really understand how machine learning works, we need to go back to that idea of training.
Okay, the Jeevan uncle analogy.
Yeah. Remember how we form more neural connections in our brain as we get to know him?
Right. We learn more about him over time.
Well, the same thing happens with AI.
You feed it data.
Tons of data. And as it processes that data, it starts to identify patterns.
Like recognizing Jeevan uncle's favorite foods.
And once it's trained on enough data, it can start making predictions.
Predictions like guessing what Jeevan uncle might want to eat.
Exactly. And if it gets it wrong,
It learns from its mistakes.
yeah, that feedback helps it refine its understanding.
So it's a constant process of learning and improving.
And they talk about different types of machine learning too.
Okay, what are they?
So there's supervised learning.
Supervised, yeah.
Yeah, imagine showing an AI thousands of pictures of cats and dogs.
Okay.
And for each picture, you tell it, this is a cat or this is a dog.
So you're giving it labeled data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that helps the AI learn to distinguish between the two.
So like training a child with flashcards.
Kind of. And a real-world example of this is spam filters.
Oh, yeah.
They're trained on emails that are labeled as spam or not spam.
So they can learn to identify junk mail.
Exactly.
Mm.
Then there's unsupervised learning.
Unsupervised, so no labels.
Right. This is where the AI has to find patterns in data that isn't labeled.
That sounds trickier.
It is. They give the example of a bank using AI to detect fraudulent transactions.
Okay.
So the AI might analyze the connections between transactions where they originated, things like that.
And look for anything suspicious.
Yeah, without being specifically told what fraud looks like.
So it's like the detective piecing together clues.
And the cool thing is the AI might find patterns that humans wouldn't even notice.
So it's like having an extra set of eyes that can see things we can't.
Exactly. And then the third type is reinforcement learning.
Reinforcement.
Yeah, this is where the AI learns through trial and error.
Okay.
And it gets rewards for good decisions and penalties for bad ones.
So it's learning by doing.
The example they give is self-driving cars.
Oh, there's some.
So the AI is constantly making decisions like when to brake, how to steer.
And it learns from the consequences of those decisions.
Exactly. If it avoids an accident, it gets a reward. If it crashes, it gets a penalty.
So it's constantly refining its behavior to maximize rewards.
And this type of learning is really powerful because it allows AI to adapt to complex environments.
Like navigating real-world traffic.
Exactly. So we've talked about different types of machine learning, but let's go back to those neural networks for a minute.
Okay.
They explain that a basic neural network has an input layer
Where the data goes in.
and an output layer,
Where the results come out.
and there can be hidden layers in between.
Hidden layers, what are those?
Well, those hidden layers are where the magic happens.
Okay.
They allow the network to learn more complex representations of the data.
So it's like adding more depth to the AI's thinking,
And remember those artificial neurons?
like the tiny brain cells?
Yeah, so they receive input, process it, and transmit output to other neurons.
And the strength of those connections is what stores the network's memory,
Exactly. So through training, those connections are adjusted.
based on the data the AI is seeing.
And that's how the neural network learns to perform tasks.
So it's like the AI is constantly rewiring its own brain.
In a sense. And speaking of brains, Vishnu Murthy has this really interesting perspective on learning.
Yeah.
He emphasizes the importance of constantly using our brains.
Okay. Like exercising our minds.
Yeah. He even mentions that statistic that we only use a small percentage of our brain's capacity.
Oh, yeah. I've heard that.
Right. And while the exact percentage is debated,
It's still a powerful idea.
yeah, it's about realizing the potential we have.
And not letting our minds get lazy.
Exactly. And he reminds us to avoid those mental loops.
The ones that can lead to stress and frustration.
And then he draws this fascinating parallel between mental exploration and physical exploration.
Okay.
He says our minds can travel much faster than our bodies.
That's true.
Like if you think about someone who's programming or doing scientific research. Right.
Their mind is working at incredible speeds.
Milliseconds, nanoseconds.
Yeah. Processing complex information, making connections.
While someone traveling might be taking in new sights and sounds.
But at a much slower pace.
So it's a different kind of exploration.
Exactly. And then they touch on some other key areas of AI.
Okay.
Like NLP, natural language processing.
NLP.
Yeah. This is
Yeah.
what allows computers to understand and generate human language.
So like voice assistants and translation apps.
Exactly. And then there's CV computer vision,
CV.
which enables computers to see and interpret visual information.
Like self-driving cars need that to understand their surroundings.
And of course, we already talked about
The
LLMs,
large language models.
like ChatGPT,
Right.
which combine NLP and deep learning to do all those amazing things.
So many different facets of AI.
It's a vast field.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest questions people have about AI
I can imagine.
is, will it take our jobs?
Yeah, that's a big concern.
And the conversation acknowledges that AI will likely lead to some job displacement, especially in areas where tasks are repetitive or involve a lot of data processing.
Like call centers.
Right.
AI can work 24/7. It doesn't need breaks, and it's often cheaper than employing humans.
So it's a real threat to certain types of jobs.
But they also suggest that humans can adapt by focusing on skills that AI can't easily replicate.
Okay.
Things that require creativity, empathy, complex problem solving.
So more human-centered skills.
Yeah, like maybe personalized services or artistic endeavors.
Right.
But it's a valid concern, especially for people who don't have those specialized skills.
And they touch on the idea of government support
Right, like maybe some kind of universal basic income.
to help people who are displaced by AI.
But they also caution against relying solely on that.
Because it could have economic consequences.
Yeah, like inflation.
So it's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Definitely. But the main takeaway from the conversation is that learning is key.
Learning about AI.
Yeah, and sharing that knowledge with others.
So we can all adapt and thrive in this new era.
Exactly. It's about expanding our own understanding and helping others do the same.
It's like training new neurons together.
I like that. So, to sum up, AI at its core is about creating systems that can mimic human intelligence.
Using neural networks and machine learning.
And it's a technology with the potential to both improve our lives and disrupt them.
So we need to be prepared.
And by listening to this conversation, we've gotten a great overview of the fundamentals.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating deep dive.
And here's a final thought for you to consider.
Okay.
Given how quickly AI is advancing and already surpassing human abilities in some areas, what aspects of human intelligence and creativity will always be valuable?
That's a good question.
What will make us truly irreplaceable in the future?
Something to think about.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into AI.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time.
Keep learning.